Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the Partner Roundtable at our Digital Employee Experience event. I hope you're safe and well, and it is great to be with you for the next 45 minutes to bring you some insight into our thinking about where employee experience is going, and in particular focusing with some of our partners on how exactly the technology platforms that are available today can really enable a transformed employee experience. It's great to have a number of our key partners with us today. Let me give you a quick introduction. So we start with Eliza Ronka, Head of Digital Market Development at Siemens Smart Infrastructure, including the human-centric workplace offering Comfy. Hello, Eliza.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Next up, we've got Brad Anderson, the President of Product and Services at Qualtrics. Thanks for being with us today, Brad. Hi.
Hey, James. Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to this.
Thank you. And Pedro Bados, CEO and founder, co-founder, I should say, of Nexthing. Hey, Pedro. Great to be with you today. Thank you.
Hi, James. Glad to be here.
Perfect. And last but not least, Elizabeth Carducci, Chief Revenue Officer for Mandalia. Hi, Elizabeth. Great to be here today. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, James. Thanks. Great to be here as well.
So, in the previous sessions, we've explored what employee experience means in terms of the rebound of organizations, and then also pragmatically and strategically how organizations need to pivot to think about the employee experience and the impact that can have and what's required to transform that. Today, I want to dive with the partners into thinking about a platform that enables a transformed employee experience, thinking about what we can do with the data to make this step change that I believe organizations absolutely need to achieve today, moving from an IT-centric way of thinking about service performance and SLAs, really to a holistic view of what employee experience means. How do you make it measurable and impactful to an organization? And then how, as an organization, can you take the steps to transform and take action on the basis of that? And I think we live in unique times right now. So I think none better a period of our lives and history to think about how we can do things differently altogether. So hopefully in the next 45 minutes or so, we can really delve into the topics and understand and help organizations see exactly what is required to move forward. Let me say before we start, there will be a live Q&A in parallel. So our employee experience experts are there ready to answer your questions in the live chat. So please chat away and we'll answer as many of those questions as we can during the live session and follow up afterwards as well. But let's get the ball rolling. And Eliza, if it's okay, I'd like to start with you and the here and now of the way we're working. And workspaces are clearly evolving right now. What role do you think data will play in optimizing that physical workspace in the future? And we're kind of coming to terms with hybrid working, but some big changes ahead.
Certainly. So data is definitely a pivotal piece of the puzzle, let's say, in terms of future of work. It is not the only thing that drives the change. Cultural aspects, leadership, those are, let's say, the ground rules that need to be in place in order for us to actually utilize the data to derive actionable insights and hence then develop workplaces towards a more hybrid working model, towards a more productive environment that actually fosters the individual preferences of the employees. So the role of data is really to be this critical enabler of that change. But I really want to emphasize that a lot of this change does have to come from outside of the data as well. And I think in terms of how to then use that data, there's two ways. There's, for the employer or the organization to get the status quo and to get the, let's say, realistic KPIs that they might want to drive going forward. But equally important is to have that data transparent then for the users so they can actually behave differently. Again, it is really a change of behavior, and then you can actually end up achieving those KPIs that you want to achieve. So it's really kind of twofold, the use of data from the employer side and from the employee to behave differently.
No, we absolutely see that and very much agree that there's really a blurring of boundaries going on right now across whether it's the hybrid work style or whether it's the relationship between employee and employer. We see absolutely that blurring of different styles and ways of working, even between IT and HR and other parts of the organization, as we've all pulled together to begin to rethink and redefine how employee experiences look. So absolutely see that. And one of those things that we see as we focus on that employee experience, Pedro, is that link to how do we link this data and operational experience to performance? And something we've talked about a lot. But how do you see organizations making that link between the operational data that we've had within the workplace and the overall experience of the employee today?
Yes, James. The biggest transformation that we have seen in the industry, I mean, from our perspective, is really this ability to include the employee in the equation. You know, traditionally, IT departments, as you said, they have been, okay, this is the way the things they should work, and my employees, my customers, they should consume it. Now it's all about, I want feedback from them. I want to understand how they are struggling. I want to understand what they need. I want to build a future of IT with them. And this is really where data comes into play, and why people, they need not only hard data from systems, but also sentiment data. So how people are really experiencing. And the impact, I think, is a great question. But when you look at why people are leaving companies, you know, there's this traditional thinking that people are leaving companies because of their bosses or salaries or all these things. But the psychology is saying that people are leaving companies because they don't feel productive, because they don't get the job done. And when you drill down into why they don't get the job done, there are multiple factors. But the technology factors, I think there are some studies that they say is 1/3 of the reasons why people they can't get their job done. So if us as digital employee experience companies, we are able to make sure that people can get their job done, they will increase retention rates, they will increase productivity, and this is a direct impact in the bottom line and in the top line. So there's a direct correlation, as we say it.
No, I absolutely agree, Pedro. And I think supporting end users and their needs and thinking of, as we see trends like hyper-personalization appearing now, treating everyone as unique individuals, as each of you joining us today in your unique situations and circumstances, it's really incumbent on us as a service provider to begin to be able to use the technology and the data to deliver service differently, to really care about the employee experience. And Elizabeth, that's something that maybe we could delve into a little bit, is how can we take that data to transform the user care experience? So not only serving them as IT has been subservient to the organizations in the past, but how can we really change and care about the employee, and what aspects are the most important when we take the data in that direction?
Yeah, James, I couldn't agree more that thinking about the employee and the user experience of the employee is so important. Every single day, employees are running into obstacles that keep them from performing their best work, and too often these challenges go unnoticed or unresolved by the organization, which does lead to disengagement, low performance, high turnover, and unsatisfied customers. And so companies need a way to really capture not only what the company wants to hear from their employees, but what their employees really want to tell them, and then to activate the right people in the organization to take action. And today, many organizations only capture feedback quarterly or annually or via pulse on their schedule, and not in the daily flow of work where the employee experience is most at risk. As Pedro said, 1/3 of engagement is due to technology-related factors. So just as companies are looking to understand how consumers interact with them digitally, it's important to gain real-time insight into how well the employees think your technologies are performing in order to prioritize fixes, innovations, and future investments. For example, when a customer of ours used feedback provided to their IT service desk in order to prioritize improvements, they saw a 10% reduction in incident volume, saving employees up to 20 minutes per day, obviously a huge increase in productivity. And on the flip side, in the same way that brands can drive consumer loyalty through interaction with people, its human interactions are at the heart of workforce engagement and productivity. And so, in a recent mapping of 36 critical touch points, it was found that only one of these was completely owned by HR. And so it's really important to be able to use technology to distribute the insights across functions, and then to drive actions like coaching to individual managers as well.
No, I see that very much. And for us as an IT services organization, we want to build the platform to help organizations to begin that journey and to embrace. But I think, and I can see already in the engagements we have, how we develop that with our customers in the future and understand their industries and the needs of users is going to be really, really key on that journey. And I think, Brad, part of that, and we all suffer from this in the IT, is that perception is reality. And measuring perception historically has been very difficult. Perception has been two people having a conversation when we could go to the office at the printer about the service experience or what was great or what wasn't. How and building on Elizabeth's point, how do organizations begin to measure that perception, and who are the key stakeholders that begin that journey with the organizations that are leading this area already and ready to embrace it?
Yeah, yeah, it's a really good question, James. Perception really is reality, and organizations and leaders want to be able to understand, what the broad perception is of the employees with respect to the organization, especially CIOs and IT leaders. But when you think about perception, you really need to get down to the individual because at the end of the day, individuals make the decision to remain, to stay, to move based upon what their sentiment, what their feeling is, and what their experience is, and what their perception is. And it's super fascinating because, we have to be able to understand what that perception is and then be able to take action on that. And so it's really not about measurement if you're not also taking action. So one of the things that we see in organizations that are leading is they really do a good job of listening, and that's listening to all the different listening posts that they can. Then as they learn the things that are, either getting in the way or the things that could accelerate, they take immediate action on that. And it's really interesting if you think about what happened with the pandemic, the IT experience really became the proxy for the organization. Because when you're just sitting on meetings like what we're doing right now all day long, how good your IT experience is really becomes the proxy. And it's fascinating because if you look at millennials, 40% of them say that they would leave an organization if they believe that the organization is using substandard technology. But then 60% of employees are saying that they think that they don't have what they need from a technology perspective. So more than ever, IT leaders working in conjunction with HR leaders, just like what Elizabeth said, have to have that holistic view because it's a shared responsibility now for increasing engagement and productivity.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think we speak the same language between IT and HR, but there's a translation that's required and a learning journey that we all need to go on. And I think it's a discussion we're beginning to have more and more with our customers. And I think it's going to be key that you have all the stakeholders together as we forge ahead and we move through the tactical phase of work from home, return to work, hybrid working. When we go beyond there and begin to think further ahead, it's going to be critical and super important that we get the right model in place from the outset. So no, I fully agree, Brad, with what you're saying. I think the question we need to address as well is when we combine these data sources, we've got all of this data and all of yourselves are very rich in data, and as an organization, Atos is using that to deliver a better level of service. But what do we get when we combine these data sources? Pedro, if we pull different data sources together, what do you think we can make happen?
Well, our particular answer from Next Insight is really what we call digital experience score. So our dream is really to have a very simple score as we have with NPS or with the Glassdoor score that can really measure the digital experience that companies are providing to their employees. And of course, it sounds easy, but it's a very complex thing to do because on one side you have the hard data, monitoring systems, problems, and all that. And on the other side, you are listening to the employees. I mean, the sentiment data. So how can you combine all that into a single score, which is able to benchmark? Benchmarking, I think, is really important in this context because companies are different, and what is really important is to improve over time. So how they can compare different departments? So how to put all that into simple scores, which can be discussed at board level and at management level, I think it's super important, trying to simplify all this data into very simple metrics. So, and this is part of the things we're working on with our customers.
I definitely, and that really excites me. We've been working very hard with customers to develop an experience level agreements. Atos is also going a step further with decarbonisation level agreements now, where that personal choice of the individual is really in terms of where they want to work is addressed, I think, in being able to deliver a quality of experience and care, a quality of responsibility socially as well for the environment that we work in. And I think those are going to be key factors going forward. So to take the data from yourselves to be able to measure that, I think it's going to be critical. Really interested as well if we can work to link what we do together to Glassdoor in the future, to be able to index link what the IT sees with what Brad and Elizabeth see to something like Glassdoor. I think that is kind of a super cool direction that we could go on in the future, to be confident that we can make that link. Always, of course, taken into effect an impact of the external factors, but that's absolutely where we'd like to go. And I think, Elizabeth, it's a sensitive topic when we talk about the data that's available, and how do we begin to guarantee privacy? We look at the way employees are working. Our goal is to transform their experience. how can we maintain a level of trust with an employee today from a privacy point of view?
You know, that's a great question, and not always an easy one to answer. But ultimately, organizations are getting a lot more sophisticated in thinking about privacy and consent for specific data for different purposes when it comes to customer data. And the idea is similar when it comes to employee data. What data will be used for what purpose? Who will have access to it? And has the employee consented? I mean, these are the critical things that companies need to think about. And data privacy and security must be built in by design and consider all the nuances of employee privacy rights, which is complicated, of course, by the employer-employee relationship. So I think that people are being very thoughtful about it in terms of how and when they use what data, how they're going to capture it, and how they're going to retain it, and if they're going to retain it. The good news for employee experience is that when it comes to understanding and improving the experience, there's a spectrum of anonymous to confidential to identifiable, and companies will work across that spectrum based on the nature of the feedback, who will be seeing it, the type of action that needs to be taken, and oftentimes with the consent of the employee. At the end of the day, this is going to sound very controversial to say, but how well does Google know you versus how well does your employee know you? And of the two, which do you actually want to know you better? Broadly speaking, so long as there is trust in how their data will be handled and used, employees want better and more personalized experiences, and will share information in service of that.
No, I absolutely agree. And taking the positive side of what we could do and show that the data is driving a better experience, I think, as we all read and understand the impact the way of working is having on mental health, looking at the aspects that not only enable better experience and better performance, but also able to deliver a safer working environment wherever people are, is going to be really, really key. And Eliza, we're learning more and more about new work patterns right now, and data is a key part of that. How's that impacting the modular workplace design in the future? Do you see other trends emerging? And how do you address that safety issue as well as enabling a safe return to work right now? What do you see?
Yeah, that's very interesting because we work a lot with also the spaces, the physical buildings, and how to utilize spaces better. As the first thing that probably hit the headlines that came to real estate when COVID happened was that there will be a massive reduction of real estate. Now we've come to see that okay, maybe that reduction is not as massive. There is more of a repurposing of spaces going forward, and this is also, of course, based on the data. So how do people want to experience spaces? What kind of spaces will they choose to work in if they come into the offices versus staying at home or some other location? And all of that kind of is then playing a part in this repurposing of those spaces. Now, the topic of safety is very interesting, and privacy concerns, and I really say concerns over compliance, because I think compliance is, especially here in Europe, very much already standard because of GDPR and all that. So it is compliance is one thing, but concern, the human sentiment, is the tricky part. And when it comes to these kind of topics like utilization of spaces and repurposing spaces based on that data, pre-COVID, there was maybe a little bit of hesitation, in terms of applying technology like sensor technology or other to get this data available. And now with COVID, everyone is kind of starting to understand and maybe appreciate that data also from the employee perspective, and that concern has certainly alleviated. However, I always want to, really emphasize that this concern or fear that comes from the privacy topic is that will override any other benefits. So if the employees feel that their data is not safely handled or is misused, or there is any kind of privacy concern of being tracked as an individual by the employer, that it will be used against you in terms of career development, whatever it might be, any concern or fear, that will, all the benefits that we try to achieve with a better employee experience, which is productivity, well-being, and all that, will be basically, counteracted and destroyed. So hence, I think this topic of security, whether it is that we look at it from the space perspective, as we very often do, it's equally important to look that there is none of this concern materializing. If there are even the slightest signs, then address that immediately with, like Elizabeth was saying, with consent and all these other methods. Because otherwise, all the good intentions and the KPIs, as I mentioned, that you wanted to drive, it will be futile, because it will be counterbalanced with fear and the negatives. So that, I think, is, even though we look at it a lot from the space perspective, we still have that same topic of privacy concern to address. But with the new hybrid way of working with employees more and more seeing the value for themselves as well in this location independence, and understanding that there needs to be some data in order for them to apply this independence and choice. There is more, let's say, a lenience towards being okay with having technology that measures things such as utilization.
I think it's a great point, and that ability to empower and enable the end user to make the choice for us is, I think, where you begin to see the value. And I think if as individuals, the same in our private lives and our home lives, if you see value from a service, then you're far more likely to donate, shall we say, your data to that service in return for the enhancements you get as a result. So I think that balance is really critical for us. And I see organizations are still hesitant sometimes when it comes to beginning to tackle this thorny topic. They enable Office 365 and they turn off the analytics. They look at a technology like Nexthink and anonymize the data and potentially lose value. And Brad, how do organizations find that right balance between data collection and privacy, and then the value and the really impact we can drive as a result?
Yeah, it's another fantastic question. And just building on what Pedro said, most organizations, most leaders are swimming in operational data. I think back to my previous life. I spent the last 20 years building the tools that most companies use to manage their devices. And, you have telemetry that comes back from hundreds of millions of devices. So you have a very clear understanding of what users or what organizations are doing, but you often don't understand why. And it's really getting into the hearts and minds of your employees and your customers to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And it really is that combination of the operational or the O data and the experience or the X data that, as you bring that together, gives you the insights of what is happening and why it's happening. And it's that combination that then enables you to take the right actions to deliver the best experiences. Now, in terms of that data collection, one of the things I love about the way in which we go about collecting the experience data is this data is, has been mentioned, is volunteered by the employee. They want the organization to understand what their needs are. They want the organization to understand what they're feeling and what their experience is, because they want to help drive improvements. And the results are actually pretty stunning when you take a look at organizations that really focus in on employee engagement. As an example, organizations that focus on employee engagement deliver 3 times more revenue per employee than an average organization. They have 40% less employee turnover, and they have 15% greater productivity. Now, it's interesting. One of the things that I did, about 18 months ago at Microsoft is I had the chance to go into a couple of organizations where the CIOs had completely transformed the experience they were delivering to their end users, and understand how that experience had impacted the employees. And it was remarkable. These employees, where their digital workspace had been transformed, had 15% more pride and advocacy and achievement in their work. And I love this point. They said they were 121% more likely to say, "I feel valued by my company." And so you think about those kind of results where employees are saying things like, "I feel valued by my company." They're going to perform better. Employees who are engaged, employees who are happy are going to deliver better experiences to customers. They're going to have more innovation. And so the results really do speak for themselves. And it really is that combination of bringing the data sets together that leads to those real insights about what you can do.
No, it's a great point, Brad. And I think that value and that engagement is something that you lose when you work remotely, and the ability to use data and the modern technologies to bring that to bear, and with your platforms be able to measure that, I think is a critical ingredient for the future. So I think we've talked a lot about the potential and really some of the concerns that maybe are perceived to be a blocker. Where do organizations start? If an organization is thinking about embracing employee experience, they've got through the pandemic, they're thinking about their future way of working, where should they start? And if okay, I'll ask the question to all of you. And where Pedro, if an organization hasn't embarked on this journey, what would your advice be to them today?
Yeah, good question. I think, like anything, you need to start with the information and cutting through emotions and really understanding the data. And when we say data, it's hard data and also sentiment data. I insist on that. I mean, we can measure the digital employee experience just looking at crashes or issues. We also need to listen to people. And I would say it's even more important probably than the hard data. And really everyone, because sometimes the employees that they are I would say, a little bit more silent are the ones that have the best things to say, and really understanding where is the current situation. And that's why it's so important, the benchmarks. It's so important to understand where's the difference between the different departments in the same company, and doing really a thoughtful analysis of where we stand, an assessment. And then from there are different initiatives, either with partners like you or with software companies like all of us, that we can really build this maturity level. So that's something. I would like to add something else, if I have 30 seconds more, about the privacy of the data. What we are seeing right now is the balance of power has changed. Is the employee who is deciding at any time which information. I think we are all aware of the announcement of Apple, about the metrics that at companies they can do. I think this is going to continue more and more. The employee is owning his data, and the job of companies like us is really doing something meaningful for the employee, in context, relevant. They immediately see the impact that they have really to improve the IT in their company. And that's really where the world is going towards. So
it's a really great point. That's perfect, Pedro. And on that, Elizabeth, an organization has maybe begun that journey. They've spoken to Pedro and Nexthink and the data. How do they begin to integrate an experience platform on top of that? What are the first steps they should be taking?
Yeah, I think that as Pedro said, it's not always the same step for every company, because I think you have to really think about where you are as an organization, your maturity level, as well as what your strategic priorities are, because different companies will have different challenges and different struggles based on their industry, what their current state is, what their current engagement levels are, and so forth. So I think it's really important to be thoughtful and to start where you're going to be able to show some real quick impact and wins, because oftentimes we see that companies get a little bogged under by the thought of the enormity of the task at hand, because there's so many things you could do and so many places that you can listen and you can drive increases in experience. So oftentimes there's places where you can get bigger benefit as an organization where you're struggling a little bit more. And I would say start there, because then you can show some real quick wins to the organization, and employees will participate and be engaged with you so long as they see that there's some action coming out of it. The worst thing you can do, it's actually worse to listen and try and get feedback and not do anything with it than not to do it at all, because that really causes even more disengagement from employees, we found. And so it's important to start somewhere that's important. And one of the interesting things is you can also get those ideas from your employees directly. Employees are dying to share not only their feedback, but their ideas with you. And so oftentimes, if you can create a way to generate those ideas from the employees themselves of where they'd most like you to focus and start, it's often a really great way to engage your employees in this process.
No, I definitely agree that employee engagement from the outset is so important to the success. And then Brad, building on Pedro's comment as well, you have your operational data, as you guys talk about, you have your experience data. What sort of things can organizations do when they bring the two together?
Yeah, it's super interesting. The example that comes to mind for me is work that we did with the NBA last year. This is kind of timely because we're in the playoffs here in the United States. But a year ago, or less than a year ago, something had never been done before. All the players, the coaches, the families were all put in a bubble for a couple of months, and that is how they basically were able to play the year. And what was fascinating is it had never been done before, and so they went in with a set of assumptions of what they thought the experience would be. But then they used the different listening posts and the different ways to gather in both the operational and the experience data. And then daily and weekly, they were making changes in the activities that were available, the food, the security checks, all those kind of pieces. And it's all of those things that when you bring it all together, delivers that incredible experience. And in this case, for the NBA players and their families. Just building on what was said earlier about where do you start, I think one of the things every organization needs to do is you're making decisions today and you're making calls today about where you think your experience and your employees are going to be 12 months from now, 18 months from now. And so I think you always have got to start with these decisions that you're making with a view of where you want to get to in the long run as well. So what does the future hold? And if you just step back and kind of just think about experiences in a holistic way, you have brands and they've got an image and they've got a perception, they've got a value that gets embodied in the products that they delivered by employees to the customers. And so it's this combination of brand, customers, employees, and products that you want to have a holistic view of to really understand what the experience is, especially when you have employees touching customers at different points around that journey. And so we've talked a lot about employee experience here, but I would plant into the minds of people listening to this. You want to do this in the way that you're thinking holistically about what the experience management solution is for the entire organization, inside and outside, and always have that view as you're pushing forward. And that's why you need to have one platform that does all of that.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think, Eliza, just to round off that question, how can an organization take that data, their engagement and touch points with the customers possibly changed as well? How does that inform that change in physical environment? And for organizations that know they need to do something but don't quite know what yet, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, so when it comes to the, let's say, the physical office spaces and the employee experience throughout the workday, even irrespective of the office or the physical office, you have to think about, how can I make the day better? How can I create more fluid experiences? How can I reduce friction? I think those are really the big pain points from an employee standpoint when it comes to finding the right space for the right activity at the right time, whether it's in home or at the physical office. So, reducing those friction points is already a great step forward, and that's already increase in productivity, both from a well-being standpoint, because you're not losing time in doing activities that just do not create value for you as an individual or for the company, and you are more productive because you're actually saving time towards doing something more meaningful. So I think this kind of reduction of friction, reduction of time spent on unnecessary things is vital. In addition, then, of course, when you think about the workday and the kind of the user journey or employee journey throughout the workday, is how can we create more points of delight? So little moments of surge of inspiration, and that will then feed into your feeling of accomplishment as an individual, and innovation, collaboration, all these good things that we want employees to do, and more so now in the hybrid working world, that is what people flock into the office to do. How can we kind of trigger that with some kind of positive surges? And this I think is extremely important and interesting to look at. When we look at the physical spaces and data and how that has been traditionally used, it's more to drive the hard KPIs of, as I mentioned before, space utilization. That's easy to quantify, easy to put into an Excel for an investment decision, easy to count the return on that investment. And when it comes to the productivity and the sentiment side, as Pedro and the others were mentioning, it's much harder to quantify. So what we've seen now in respect of the actual physical spaces and the offices and that transformation is that often these hard KPIs of space utilization are the ones that you put into that investment decision in order to also drive then the actually more valuable KPIs of productivity, which is a much bigger benefit, but a fuzzier one to put into an Excel. So it's an interesting trend that we see, kind of going through the hardcore metrics into the so-called softer, even though we know and everyone knows in their heart that is where the biggest benefit lies.
That's it. Being able to quantify the value of those micro moments, have the things that we do hundreds of times a day by incrementally improving it. No, you're absolutely right. To round out the session, one last question to you all. I think now is really the time to act on employee experience. We're launching today our next wave of services and capabilities to enable that. But it feels relatively new as a focus area, and long overdue, I might add. If we were to reconvene in 3 years' time, say, and hopefully we can jump back, and you never know, and it may be face to face by then. What would we be talking about? Well, where are things heading? Yeah, what will good look like, or what would a fantastic experience look like in 3 years' time? Elizabeth, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that employee experience used to be thought of very differently to customer experience, but this is changing. I mean, we are talking about experience design, personas, journeys, actionability, agile. This was all lingo of customer experience until just the last few years. Before it was all annual surveys. And so, I think that the principles and approaches will continue to evolve. Companies are doing more with real-time insights and action to provide those personalized experiences that are being required for a distributed workforce and demanded by employees in order to stay. And we're likely never going back to the way it was pre-COVID. So we'll see more focus on those things that drive success for this kind of new normal: onboarding, skills boarding, social recognition, culture and connectedness, diversity, inclusion. These are all the topics that people are really trying to understand and improve these days. And we're going to see more and more of that. And the ability for individual managers to have an understanding of how they're doing with these things in order to make every employee's experience better is really, I think, the future. And then also, we're going to see an increase of companies looking at customer and employee experience together, like two sides of the same coin. Everything else, your brand, your product, your services, both internal and external, they're all there to create great experiences for your customers and employees. So we're going to see companies looking at this as a very important connected thing.
And Eliza, where do you think we'll be in 2 years to 3 years time in terms of the physical environment? Do you think they're emerging patterns or constant change?
So I agree with Elizabeth that personalization, I think that is really what is becoming more and more vital, and how to do that on scale, because of course it's easy to write out a user journey of one employee, but then how do you multiply that by even hundreds of thousands of employees in big organizations and provide still that personalized environment also from the physical environment perspective, and that is where it becomes more, let's say, challenging. But I think going forward, this is what it will be like. So we will have personalization on scale. We will have fluidity, and by fluidity I mean when you transit between different spaces, whether it's home and the office or different floors in an office, all of this will be completely friction free and seamless, and the environment will be, let's say, predictive and adapting to your needs. So I sometimes call the buildings as the second skin of the individuals. That is how it should feel like in terms of comfort, in terms of the experience, instead of being what we sometimes still see, a human warehouse. So I think really the concept of real estate will certainly transform and blur from the physical rigid assets into something more transformative. And there, the digitalization actually plays that role in creating that fluidity. I mean, that is key. So it has to be fluid, it has to be personalized, and it has to create that delight. Because if we don't add that bit of extra, if we only reduce the negatives but don't add that bit of extra, I think we're not using the full potential that we could, also in terms of the physical spaces.
I look forward to coming to meet you in your office, that's for sure. And Brad, 3 years out, what do you see changing? What are the big bets from your point of view that we can achieve in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, a lot of good things have been said here. It's interesting. We've talked a lot about just how much change happened in the last year and how much change happened in just the months of March and April of 2020, where we did 6 or 7 years of digital transformation in just 2 months. I think the change we're about to go through as we go back to the offices and we get into a hybrid model is actually going to be bigger than what we saw in 2020. In 2020, everybody was remote, so there was a level playing field for everybody. But in a hybrid model where you have some voices in the room and some voices out of the room, I think a lot of the progress that we've made in areas like diversity and inclusion and hearing all the voices is actually going to get more complicated. And so I think now more than ever, organizations need to have as many listening posts coming into them so that they are able to understand and take real-time action. So in terms of where I think we go in 2 to 3 years, one, today when I walk in and talk with organizations, it's very common to hear that they're using 4, 5, 6 different solutions to gather, employee versus customer versus product. And I think you'll see that converge because organizations will want to take a look at it holistically. The second thing that I think will happen is you'll have organizations taking much more action based upon those insights. And we're just seeing that in the use of our own tools. We've seen a 650% increase in the number of actions that people are taking. And in just the year 2021, our customers will take more than 1.5 billion actions based upon the insights that they learn. So I think this combination of converging to have a holistic view with a culture of action, a bias to action, a system of action, those are going to be the things that I think organizations will be driving hard for in the next couple of years.
Some great points. I absolutely agree. It's getting the data, understanding it, step one, doing more with it is really where we need to get to. Pedro, and from your point of view, some great comments. Apologies for putting you last, but where do you think we'll be in 2 to 3 years?
Yes, and on top of that, 2-3 years is very fast for our industry. So I would try to add my perspective there. So first, I think I would like to say something. I mean, the role of the IT teams, I think, is changing. Before it was really firefighters, You know, they're trying to fix issues reactively, and now they are starting to become proactive. It's not anymore about fixing things because they can automate it. It's really about understanding what people need, understanding. So if you look at that, it is a completely different role. You know, before you were a firefighter, now you are about the strategy. And I think this is a trend for that we see in all our customers. So there will be new positions and new roles like the digital employee experience officer, maybe, or director, or we'll see. So that's something that is gonna come up. Also, you know, this overlap between HR and IT, it's already there. I mean, here we're talking about employees, we're talking about IT, so it's gonna accelerate as well. Maybe my only dream is this, maybe a score in 3 years that will have much more standardization about what digital employee experience, the Glassdoor score, but the equivalent to the digital employee experience. I think companies are becoming more mature and think we'll be able to have much more standardization in that area. So these are some of the things that we are seeing, and hopefully will be part of this dream. Next thing.
No, I definitely agree. So some fabulous points, Pedro. Thank you. And unfortunately, we're out of time. So hopefully the Q&A, keep getting the questions coming in. But I think from an Atos point of view and with our partners today, just there's a huge opportunity, and it's been fantastic to hear your views on what can happen both in the physical environment, in terms of measuring the experience going forwards in the future, connecting that operational and experience data together. And I think listening to the employees, those listening posts, is a great takeaway as well, that as we change the way we work again, and there will be constant change, how we can use this data for the better of the employee. And I'm absolutely convinced that if you think about inclusion and accessibility, mental health awareness, the ability that we've got with data to improve the employee experience and make that tangible link to the performance of an organization. I think if jointly we can do that together, then we've been doing our role correctly, that looking after the employees for sure will deliver those business results. So just a massive thank you for being with me today, Eliza, Pedro, Elizabeth, Brad. Great insight, and I look forward to working with you all in the future. And thank you once again. Have a great day.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.